Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire. Hey, Maggie.
Hey, Mike.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this discussion today because
It's about feelings.
it's about feelings, and it's some vulnerable feelings on my end that I think are a bit unique to me specifically and not to you. We're going to talk about fear and 8 ways to tackle some of your financial fears. And, this is inspired by a talk I gave at campFI. And what I'm excited about is just because we haven't talked about campFI on the show yet, but a few weeks ago, Greg and I went to campFI, which is described as like adult summer camp in terms of like the setting. And there's, 20 of them that happen around the US, but it's basically a long weekend with a small group. There were like 50, 60, somewhere between 50 to 70 people there. But so a small group, under 100, of a mix of couples, singles, or even some kids there. And we were like at an outdoor kind of retreat facility in Florida. But again, there's ones all over the US. And they're super casual in a good way. And they're just bringing together like-minded people who are somewhere on their FI journey, somewhere from just curious and wanting to learn more, all the way to people who have already retired. And Greg and I loved it. We met just some really cool people. Mike, you were not able to make it, but it was just like such a fun weekend. And it just to me reminded me of the power of community. And anyways, I just wanted to give a shout out to all the awesome people we met and new friends that we made at campFI.
Yeah, it sounded like a great time.
Yeah, it was fun. And it wasn't like overly scheduled, which I love too. Like there were times for talks, and then there were times that we went canoeing, did archery, played basketball, played board games, played code names. It was a lot of fun. And it was just great. So I actually spoke at it though, and I gave a talk about fear because I can't even think how often we actually talk about this on the podcast. You hear a lot of stuff from me on the side, Mike.
I hear it all the time.
Yeah, you are responsible often for assuaging a lot of my fears, but they're here and they're pretty, they have, and Greg is too. He hears a lot about it. But I have a lot of fears about many things financially. I think I've talked about like my bag lady syndrome before. And which by the way, is kind of the idea that like, no matter how successful you are, you're always afraid that like something could happen and take it away overnight. And it's a real thing. There was actually a book called The Bag Lady Papers that I'll put a link in the show notes to that I read like a decade ago. And it was by someone who was really successful. She was the editor of a popular magazine, fashion magazine. She had invested most of her life savings and assets with Bernie Madoff and lost it all overnight in the whole Bernie Madoff scheme. And it was an example. When I read it, I was like, this is what I was always afraid of. Like it was fueling my fears, right? I was sort of always afraid. And one of the reasons I saved a lot of money early on in life is I was kind of had this fear in the back of my head that no matter how well I did, something could always happen to take it all away. Mm-hmm. And so I always wanted to have reserves. But do you know what this thing called fear is, Mike?
I mean, I am like familiar with it only because you mention it all the time. But
do you feel it? I mean, I'm genuinely curious.
I don't think, we probably have to define fear. And I think I just have a much more
actually
calculated approach to all this stuff.
Yeah.
But we've mentioned this a few times on the show, all of the like normal human emotions that you have, I also have. I just don't have them to the same degree.
Yes.
Mostly because when it comes to money, I've lived a very different life than you.
Yeah.
So I will kind of layer on my own feelings throughout this, and but I'm very interested to hear this talk that you gave.
So, and I'm kind of using the talk as a foundation for what we're talking about, but ultimately we're just going to kind of have a conversation on it. But it's funny that you say, it depends on how I define fear, because one of the things I want to start with is defining fear, right? Because I think the first piece that I hope is in some way kind of cathartic for others to hear is it's normal to have fear around a lot of these things. And I'm a couple weeks away from retiring at this point, and I've accomplished, and I'll speak about kind of myself and my husband together. Like, we've accomplished a massive amount of financial goals, right? We've paid off our mortgage. We live debt free. We've had successful corporate careers for over 40 years combined. We've reached this, thing called FI, financial independence. We've put in our notice at work. We're retiring. But ultimately, like, I still have a massive amount of fear, right? Like, I worry about, what if I get sick? What if my kids get really sick? What if we run out of money? What if what if Russia invades Ukraine and there's a potential war coming? What if I regret quitting my job? What if I regret walking away from a good job with a good company with people I enjoy? And, what will other people think of me when I do this? Like, these are all the things that, rattle around in my brain of like, will I have enough money to really enjoy my life in retirement? Will I be stressed about, just all these things. I can't even, that's just a small smattering of some of the questions that like knock around in my brain. And Mike, I think to your comparison of yourself, like, I don't think those questions, I don't think you like stew on those questions.
Yeah. Not really. I think just to a different degree. Maggie, this might be the wrong time to tell you this, but I was looking over the financial models that I built for you to determine when you can retire. And there was a typo, and it's actually said you're ready at 51, not 41.
That's the sort of stuff I fear, Mike. So thank you for giving me a live example that I'm going to need you to validate was a joke.
It was a joke. I'm kidding.
I'm just going to need it on the record, or I'm going to keep thinking about it. Okay, let's define fear.
Yes, I'm looking at the definition of fear, and I will read these off and then describe why I think I have different levels of emotions on this. So there's a few different definitions, as most words have. One is an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger. Another one is anxious concern. And last one is reason for alarm. I have concerns about all kinds of stuff, but only insofar as they are interesting problems for me to solve. I wouldn't describe myself as being anxious about them. I am not alarmed by the prospect of them. And I don't think my emotions I would describe as strong. I sometimes have some, unpleasant anticipations of some challenges, but nothing I would think of as dangerous. And so that was pretty vague. Let me give you some specifics. Like, I think you are a little bit newer to investing.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, you've only really been seriously investing for, a handful of years. Yeah. And so I have been investing since I was a teenager. And although the amounts were small back then, I have gone through all kinds of, one major recession, all kinds of dips. I've made some bad investments. I've made some great investments. So like, I feel like I understand what's coming and am emotionally prepared for it. If I lose like $100,000 in a day, I'm just like, well, that's too bad. It's going to come back. But I'm not scared about it. I'm not upset about it. It's just something I've been living through for a while.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the difference. I have been thinking about it and working on this for so much longer than you that I have overcome a lot of that fear. Mm-hmm. Because like when I was younger, like when I was in my late 20s and investing, if I made a mistake and like lost $1,000, which would have been like a lot of money at the time, like that would like really scare the hell out of me. I was like, oh my God, I would get like really anxious looking at my portfolio, and I just don't feel that way anymore.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point of just kind of with more time and experience, some of that fear goes away. And that's comparable for lots of things in life, right? And so I think, when just to take a step back for a minute, like to me, one of the reasons we're defining fear is because as I think about how I've even like worked through my own fear, and I've worked a lot of the things I'm talking about, like I still have the thoughts, but I've worked through them a lot in the sense of, a year ago, I was really scared to quit my job for various reasons. And I've gotten through that, and I have, right? I'm not officially finished yet, but I'm, can't unwind this. But my point is, the first step, I think, in moving past some of your fears is to better understand what fear is, which is why we're kind of talking about this right now. And I think the other thing that is important as you kind of learn about fear and look at fear and sit with it for a minute is also to understand that there's a good side of fear and then there's a bad side of fear, right? And the good side of fear is, well, actually, let's start with the bad side of fear, right? Because that's kind of what some of the things that I was talking about here is, fear can be really infectious, right? It can literally create wars. It's what terrorists do. They incite fear in people. And that's the bad side of fear. And I would argue too, it could be infectious in a good way, because you not being afraid of certain financial things, Mike, is infectious to me in a good way, right? If you were scared of all this stuff financially, like I would be like, oh my God, like if Mike's scared, I'm really scared, And so anyways, the bad side of fear is it can be really infectious. If we give into it, we would never do anything, right? We would never leave our house if we gave into all of our fears, because we'd be thinking, well, I could, something could hit me in the head, fall out of the sky and hit me in the head. A car is going to hit me. So every day we do anything, we're essentially getting past our fears to even leave our house and get out of bed every day.
Let's pause on that for a second. One of the things that I think about often is something that my dad told me maybe when I was starting to drive. It might have been related to driving, but he was like, you shouldn't be afraid of doing this or certain things, but you should be very cautious about them and be very careful around them. And so when I think about driving, getting on the road is the most dangerous thing that I do in my life. But I'm not afraid of it. I'm just extremely careful and cautious.
And you're prepared is the other thing I would argue. You know how to drive. Yeah. You'd be really scared if it was your first time out on the road.
If I was afraid of driving, I couldn't do anything in my life.
Yeah.
But then, I think about flying. I do not like flying. I am scared of airplanes. Turbulence freaks me out.
I didn't know this about you.
Yeah. But
someone who loves to travel.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. But it's pretty common. Like turbulence, I think scares most people just because you're not in control of the airplane.
Yeah, you're very vulnerable.
And it's also just like, it's terrifying to have a plane crash. But flying is like the safest thing you can do. Being on an airplane is the safest place you could be in the world. It is
statistically.
Is much safer statistically, but it is safer from all kinds of stuff. I mean, if you wanted to pick the safest place to be in the world right now, it would be on an airplane flying over the ocean somewhere. But that is not how we feel. People get very anxious. I get very anxious getting on airplanes and flying on airplanes. I just say that to say that there is a difference between being fearful of something and being cautious and respectful of something.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Okay, so the other bad sides of fear, it stops us from fulfilling our potential. And also, it is bad for your health, right? So fear actually weakens your immune system. It can cause cardiovascular damage. It can cause gastrointestinal problems, such as like ulcers and other illnesses. And it can age you more, right? If you're stressed all the time and you're constantly fearful of things, it literally can cause premature death, right? And so it's yet another reason to push past your fears and kind of work through them. But I think it's interesting to also talk about the good side of fear, right? So the good side of fear is it reminds us that we are alive and that we can feel things, right? So, when you go in, I don't know if you're into things like more like, I can't think of the word of like jumping out of a plane and
skydiving,
whitewater rafting. Well, I couldn't think of the name of that category of stuff,
extreme sports.
Yeah. Like extreme sports and just kind of, high intensity things. There's some word I cannot think of, but anyways, there's people who get a lot of thrill from the feeling of fear. I'm not really in that category, to be clear, but it does. It reminds us that we're alive, that we can feel things. It also, it keeps us safe and it stops us from doing like reckless and dangerous things. So, the fear of what it feels like to burn your hand stops you from like sticking your hand in boiling water. Right. And so there's some lenses of fear that actually keep us from doing stupid stuff. To use your car example, right? Like, we drive in our lane. We're supposed to, because you don't want to get hit by oncoming traffic in the other lane. Right. And so that's again, another good example of fear. Also, it can allow us to feel hope and relief and gratitude, right? When you have that feeling, Mike, on a plane where turbulence hits and you're like sitting there with your family, your wife and your kids, and you get scared for a minute. I don't know about you, but like, I really love my kids like an extra amount, my kids and my husband, like I'm like, wow, I have a sense of like gratitude. And, again, you feel all those feelings right after you think something might be taken away from you and then you get it back. And then also it can bond us together. So in that same example, when you go through something really scary with somebody else, it really does create a bond with them that is hard to break and brings you closer together.
It's a great list, Maggie.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so in your example about the car, which I like, or about driving, the shift that I made personally, and I think I told this story once of like Greg was saying this to my daughter. She was scared of something. It was like a school play tryout or something. And I was trying to like make her feel better about it and tell her she should still do it. And then Greg kind of gave her this quote about courage is not the absence of fear, but it's actually the triumph over it. And that's a Nelson Mandela quote. There's a lot of people who have quoted that, but to continue the Nelson Mandela version, the brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, when Greg made that comment to my daughter, all of a sudden she was like, that's super helpful. I'm going to go do it. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know what I said, but it clearly was not helpful. And I just, it resonated with me because I was like, you're right. It's not like we should feel fear, right? And using your driving example, right? You want a certain amount of fear that keeps you wanting to be prepared and wanting to, be vigilant and paying attention while you're driving and not texting and other stuff. But it's the idea of recognizing that fear is normal. We should feel it, but we should push past it, right? And that's what courage is. Courage is the idea to say, hey, I have all these fears about quitting my job, but ultimately I want to do what is courageous for me and something that is in line with my values. And I'm going to push past that fear. I'm not expecting that there will be no fear, right? It's not the absence of fear. It's my triumphing past that fear. And that to me is like such a simple concept, but that is the like secret. You know what I mean? Like that's the answer to fear.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And if you are afraid of these things, it is not bad, and it is also not your fault. Like the whole economy and the way our job culture is shaped is to very subtly over time create fear that you cannot live a certain life without a product. You cannot achieve happiness without a certain type of job. Like that is embedded into our culture. And over the decades that you've been alive, you have been conditioned to believe that you have to do things a certain way. And it's ridiculous. So understand that like you are afraid because of these other forces, and you can and should overcome them.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of overcoming them, we're going to share 8 specific tactical tips to help you overcome your fears. And you can use this for your financial fears, for, any fears you have in your life. We're going to focus this around financial fears specifically because, we talk about finance here in case you're new and haven't figured it out. So let's go through these 8 things. And Mike, you just touched on this. Number 1 is be kind to yourself, right? Accept that fear is normal, especially when you're taking the path less traveled, right? So again, I'm this whole kind of talk and what we're focusing on is around the idea of financial independence and having the courage to, in my case, leave my job and go down a path less traveled and a less common path. And so just be kind to yourself and recognize that you are taking a path that is less traveled, and there's going to be some fear that comes with that.
Next up is a critical one. Listen and learn. You need to educate yourself through books, podcasts, YouTube, blogs, whatever it is, because the more you understand about what you are stepping into, the less afraid you're going to be of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And speaking of the more you know, the next one is to know your numbers. So it's everything financially related, any decisions you're making to like take some time off or leave your job or whatever it might be. You can't do those easily and without fear if you don't know what your numbers are. So you should be tracking your expenses. You should be tracking your net worth, right? We talk about this a lot, like what gets measured gets better. And the more you know your numbers, the more you are able to truly just be rooted in reality and not let emotions and other things, take over and cause more fear than it needs to.
And you should also quantify your fears. So put numbers against some of these things that you're afraid of, and it will help you deal with them better. So one of the things that I like to do with air travel is there's a stat that I heard, it's probably a little bit different now, but a plane takes off every 6 seconds around the world and lands without incident. There's a plane crash like once every year out of, all of
Millions.
These flights. So like this is incredibly safe. And I have to remind myself that like this is not a big deal. And you can do this with your money as well. Like if the market tanks by 30% and we have a huge recession, calculate that number out. You can do this in your net worth and you will see what that impact is going to be. And does that change your mind? Does that help you plan a little bit better?
Yeah. Do some worst case scenario calculations. I have literally before I ever decided to formally leave my job, I have this kind of like life planning spreadsheet, which is the equivalent of what you talk about in your book, Mike, which is the end of life spreadsheet, where you like literally I've got it like forecasted out for every year until I'm, really, really old and probably not around anymore. And at the bottom of that sheet, I literally listed all my fears and was like, what if this is more expensive than I realized? What if there's an unexpected illness that happens? What if there's this? And I put numbers against them. And I was just like, look, worst case scenario, let me size all this stuff. And it's a fascinating experience. I mean, I even did like, what if I need a Tesla? Right?
What if you need it?
What if I need a Tesla? What if 5 years from now?
What if I cannot live without that Tesla?
I am like, I am just not happy. And I'm pretty sure it's because I don't have a Tesla. I literally put that in my number. I was like, what if I decide I want a fancy car and that's important to me? And I think like, if I just kept working, I could have had things like this, Anyways, I'm kind of like, that's half joking, but I might have had a Tesla on my list. Okay. Mainly because I love electric cars. Okay. Next one is remember that you are resilient. So back to my Tesla. Never mind. I should quit using Tesla as an example. But I'll use myself as an example. I have a strong skill set. I can work again. I can do whatever is needed to put food on the table if like something crazy happens and I lose everything I own overnight. You know what I mean? Like A, there's a tiny percentage chance of that ever happening. But B, if it does, I am resilient. I could go do anything from working at Starbucks to driving for Uber to getting to doing consulting in the field I currently work in, right? And so if and when I do need to make money again, I have the ability to do that. And I think that's an important thing to remind yourself. And I love the quote, which I think maybe comes from Financial Samurai, that, my worst fear is everybody else's everyday scenario. So my worst fear is like, I got to go back to work again someday. But that's how most of the world lives. So that's actually not anything to be afraid of, is the point.
And once you have determined these fears, write them down, rank them in order of scariest to least scary, journal, keep a diary, understand how your emotions change around them. But the practice of writing things down can be incredibly helpful when you are struggling through certain fears. Yeah,
I'm not a big journaler. Have you ever been a journaler, Mike?
Not really.
I'm not either. I've never been able to stick with it, but there's a lot of research around the value of journaling, which if you're into that can be really helpful here also.
I mean, I do make notes to myself, and I'll make like decision trees and that sort of stuff, which I guess is my form of journaling.
I love that your form of journaling is decision trees. It's right on brand, Mike. Okay. Speaking of research, this one is heavily founded in science and research, and the power of breath work and meditation. And I would add to this anything just spiritual for whatever, your own spiritual beliefs are. There's a ton of science proving that these things can help with fear and anxiety, right? They're easy to leverage. They're free, right? Whether it's a spirituality of going to church, whether it's meditating, whether it's breath work, there's a ton of great free apps. We've got a whole episode on meditation and the power of that. And we can share that in the show notes. But those things are like physical, tactical things that can help you work through your fear and anxiety.
And the last point that we're going to make on this is one of the most important. It's going to be finding your community, finding your friends, surround people who are like-minded and supportive of your struggle, and that will help you through this. It is very easy to find people who will reinforce your fears, to exacerbate your fears. If you know you want to overcome them, you should find people to help you do that. Don't surround yourself with the opposite. Yeah,
I completely agree. I know we've talked a lot about the power of community lately. And, so that's the list. Those are 8 things. We hope those are helpful as you are thinking about pushing through some of your own fears. And, the point I think is nice to end on, Mike, is for me personally, I got to the point where I pushed past my fears enough that I became afraid of something else, which is another tactic, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I quote, actually, I will, or not quote, I will credit my husband, Greg, for this, because I probably don't give him enough. I try to give him some nice compliments on this show, but I hope I give him enough credit for just his part in my journey. I mean, I'm often on here with you, so I'm talking about you, and you also get a lot of credit, Mike.
Thank you.
But Greg made this point at some point when we were having, discussions on this, which we have like all day, every day, over the last few months, of, the idea of actually now being more afraid of not making a change in our lives, right? Like, we have very demanding, stressful jobs. And I think we've both gotten to the point where we are now sold enough that this is the right path for us, which is leaving our jobs to, actually pursue early retirement. And we are now both more afraid of not making this change than I am of, I used to be afraid to leave my job. Now I'm afraid to not leave my job, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. It totally makes sense to me.
Yeah. It's probably it's what's been driving you you saw it when you grew up with your dad retiring at, in his early 40s. I didn't see that. So to me, this is still the path less traveled. It's the path that is, it is an uncommon path and an unorthodox path. And I've now shifted to being more afraid of not making the change. And look, if that's what keeps me motivated, I'll take the motivation I can get from anywhere. I would leave with the thought with people of, don't let fear of the unknown rob you of the pleasure of anticipating all the good things that await. Right. And I'm trying to remind myself of that right now, being, a couple weeks from taking this, massive step of leaving our jobs, both of us leaving our jobs at the same time, to this new kind of chapter that we're evolving towards. I don't know what it's going to look like. Every time I talk to someone, they're like, what are you going to do? How are you going to spend your time? Like, I've got some thoughts, right? We did a whole episode on it, but I'm not going to let, the fear of the unknown rob me of the pleasure of anticipating what this is going to look like in the future. So I'm excited.
Very beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. Well, as usual, I like to, just thank you for the role you've played on this journey. Because, for those that may be newer listening to our show, Mike and I became friends at work only 3 years ago, more than 2 years ago, 3 years ago,
3 years ago.
3 years ago. Do you know the anniversary of the day you interviewed with our company? What day is that?
November 6th.
November 6th. That's the Mike and Maggie anniversary. I'm going to write that down. I did not know the exact date, but that's impressive. You know it. That's the date you interviewed?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's the date we first met because I interviewed Mike. And at the time I didn't even know about your, personal financial prowess. I just knew about your corporate financial prowess. And anyways, we became like fast friends once you started working at our company. And you've just had in terms of kind of even just the journey I've been in and around my fear, like you've been a huge influence in encouraging me on this journey. And so I just want to say thank you if I don't say it enough.
You are very welcome, Maggie.
Thanks. And you want to hear another little funny thing that I did in my campFI talk?
Yeah.
I forgot about it. And I don't even know if you noticed it when I sent you the PowerPoint, because I think it was in an animated build somewhere. So when I was thinking about when I was talking about how I'm afraid of all these things and all the questions and what if I get sick? What if I made a joke and I redid our logo and I was like, we should call this Friends on Fear, not Friends on Fire. So I was like, I'm afraid of so many things.
Oh, I see it now.
Look at slide 7. You'll see it in there. And then at the end, I was like, I changed it back to Friends on Fire because I was like, okay, I've worked through my fears, which is true. I've worked through a segment of my fears enough to push me over the cliff. And then I'll, it's a journey. I'll continue working through things every day.
All right, Maggie. So this was a great episode. I'm really happy I got to hear this, the summary of this talk that you gave. I think it would be appropriate if you gave the top 3 takeaways because this is what you've been dealing with recently.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Top 3 takeaways. Number 1, fear. By the way, you really, are you not afraid of giving me the mic for all 3 takeaways? Because I'm going to go on for 10 minutes.
I am not afraid of it because I have no choice. You have your own mic. It's set up to record. You're going to do whatever you're going to do.
Okay. I'll do it quick. Okay. Back to top 3 takeaways. Number 1, fear is normal, right? Be kind to yourself. Accept that fear is a normal thing in anyone. And it actually brings with it many good things that, keep us safe and healthy every day. Number 2 is just the idea that getting past your fears is really what the definition of courage is. So the goal is not to not have any fear. It's to triumph over your fear. That is what courage is. It is not the absence of fear. It is the triumph over that fear. And then number 3 is there are things that you can proactively do to push past your fears. We shared 8 tips. I'm sure there are many others out there. And just remember, you can push past your fears and do some pretty amazing things in life. So we encourage you all to, noodle on that and think through what you're afraid of in your life and what you want to push past.
And Maggie, I look forward to discussing your fear in 3 months and seeing how you feel about it, because I have the utmost confidence that you're going to step into this new life and be like, why the hell did I not do this sooner?
I think
I am sure of it.
And everything, I mean, back to campFI, everybody I talked to at campFI, some people that, were a year or 2 into their retirement and some of them younger than me had that same response of you'll never look back. You'll wonder why you didn't do it sooner. You won't question it, right? All these feelings I have now will dissipate pretty quickly over time.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. If you've been challenged or inspired by what you've heard, please rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode.
If you have any thoughts or questions, we would love to hear from you. And you can always leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370, or you can hit us up on Instagram. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Thank you for talking about my feelings and my fears.
Thanks, Maggie. This was fun.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.